I'm going to try your name in the German pronunciation
Okay.
for fun. And
Yes.
after I screw it up, I'll do it the way you asked me
Yes.
to. So, Dr. Rainer Zitelmann?
Oh, okay. The English version is Rainer Zitelmann. The German version is Rainer Zitelmann.
Okay, Rainer Zitelmann.
Ah, yes, it's close.
Dr. Rainer Zitelmann,
Yes.
historian, sociologist, and author of Hitler's National Socialism. Welcome to Dad Saves America.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to talk to you today because, for starters, Hitler seems to be the only bad guy that our kids here in America are taught about from history. They don't get taught about Stalin or Mao, not really. And he has, for obviously good reason, a huge outsized sort of role in the psyche of sort of historical bad guys. And you have written about his economics and about what National Socialism meant. So I guess for starters, what was National Socialism?
Yes, before I answer the question, you're absolutely right. They haven't heard about the others, about Stalin and Mao. I can give you one example. I had in the last 20 months, I traveled to 30 countries to promote my books. And I asked people, have you heard about the biggest socialist experiment in history? This was Mao Zedong's so-called Great Leap Forward from 1958 to 1962, where 45 million people died. And wherever I spoke, whether it was in Asia, Latin America, Europe, the United States, only very few people raised their hand. Whether I spoke to 20 people, 200, 2,000, they haven't heard about this. This is the big problem. And of course, it's good that everyone heard about the crimes of, Adolf Hitler, and who killed 6 million Jews and started Second World War. But they don't know much or nothing about his economic thinking. And this was the topic of my first doctoral dissertation that is published in the United States with the title Hitler's National Socialism. By the way, I don't like to speak about Nazi, or I know that you use this word. This was a polemic word coined by his enemies, coined by socialists or communists in the 30s, because they called him fascist or Nazi, because they didn't want to call him National Socialist. This was the way how they called themselves, because they don't want to get this word socialism, that is a good word for them, connected to something that is bad. But I think we should call them what they were and how they called themselves. So don't use Nazi, use National Socialists and National Socialism. This was what they are.
Actually, before we dive into it, because all of your work is about the economics of Hitler, I want to frame this somewhat for an American audience in that we have Nazi and fascist thrown around in our politics willy-nilly. So it is almost always used for people that are on the political right. Currently, and since 2016, Donald Trump is the most recent subject of being called a fascist and a new Hitler.
We have the same in Germany. Everyone who's not left is far right, or is even fascist or Nazis. This is the same in Germany.
How should I, as the American that doesn't know really anything about a history of fascism, understand what fascism even means for real?
Fascism is what they had in Italy with Mussolini. So I wouldn't use it for National Socialism. These were two very different systems. Of course, they had something in common as well. Communism and National Socialism had something in common. But fascism, this was the system in Italy, and National Socialism was the system in Germany.
All right, I'll keep this quick. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our new content as it comes out every week. And now, back to the conversation.
I understand that Mussolini had a vision for fascism that ends up sounding like FDR in the United States, basically. The sort of big government colluding with big corporations in the name of the national interest, putting the sort of corpus or the body of the state first. Is that how you understand what Italian fascism meant?
Yes, and in this way, it's a little bit similar to National Socialism. I want to make the point, sometimes people ask me, was Hitler a socialist, or what is a social system? And my answer is yes and no. No, if you think about traditional socialism, because the traditional socialism or communism, they wanted to nationalize all private property, that it's all state-owned. This is traditional socialism, as they did it in Russia or as they did it in China, for example. This was not what Hitler wanted, and not what Mussolini wanted. But of course, they wanted not capitalism, not a free market economy. What they wanted is a system like this. Hitler said it in one of his speeches. He said, I will tell the companies what they have to do and what they have to produce. And if they say, yes, we will do it, then I'm fine with this. Then I don't have to do it. If they don't do it, then I will do it by myself. So that means the state. And this is exactly the way as it did it. They had also a 4-year plan. You know, in the communist countries, they had this 5-year plans. In Germany, they had a 4-year plan starting in 1936. And Hitler was not absolutely against nationalization, but only if it is necessary for, in his view. You know, necessary means if they don't do what he told them, then he will nationalize. Of course, this has nothing to do with a free market economy. If people tell you, it was capitalism in Germany. No, it was not capitalism. Because what's the difference between a free market economy on the one hand and a planned economy on the other hand? In a free market economy, companies decide, entrepreneurs decide what to produce. In the end, it's consumers' choice. In a planned economy, politicians and government officials decide what to produce. And the bad thing is that today in Europe, but I think also in the United States, what was once capitalism develops more and more in this direction of a planned economy.
Yeah.
Only one example here from Europe, they banned combustion engines or the registration of combustion engines for car from 2035. So it's not allowed to register cars with combustion engines. And this is the idea. You know, it's not this way that the companies that Mercedes or BMW will be state-owned. No, they are private in speech marks. But the government tells them, okay, you have to produce now on electric vehicles. It's not allowed longer to produce cars with combustion engines. And this is what I call the modern form of socialism in contrast to the traditional form of socialism. I don't know whether you heard this great speech from Javier Milei in Davos.
I did actually.
Sure.
But remind me.
And what he said in his speech, he said, there's a big threat of socialism today. And then he added, and he said, maybe for some of you it's ridiculous when I talk about socialism today, but it's only if you rely on the traditional form of socialism, where everything is state-owned. But today, they don't. It's not necessary that the state owns everything. You can do it with regulations, with taxes, and this is the modern form of socialism. In this way, yes, Adolf Hitler was a socialist, but a modern socialist, not in the traditional way as the communists. And the reason was, you know, he was a socio-Darwinist. And as a socio-Darwinist, he believed in competition. And he was afraid that if you nationalize everything from one day to another, that there would be no more competition. And this was the reason why he was skeptical against nationalizing everything. But I have to add this, and maybe we can then later talk more about this. His attitude towards these questions free market economy, planned economy, the role of the state changed a little bit in the 30s and the 40s because he became more and more, Stalin became more and more his role model, and he admired more and more the Soviet planned economy. This is what happened in the 30s and especially in the 40s.
In the U.S., there's a very famous and influential economist named Paul Samuelson, who has a book. It was a textbook of economics that has been used in schools forever.
Keynesian people.
Yes, and he had a graph predicting when the Soviet Union become a larger economy than the United States.
I know. Later he had to put it, yes, because it was ridiculous. Yes.
So this prediction, he just kept moving the dates.
Yes.
Well, okay, maybe it won't be 1965. Maybe it'll be 1975. Maybe it'll be 1985. Maybe it'll be 1990. Oh, wait, it's gone.
Like with doomsday cults, they always postpone it to another date if it doesn't happen.
I don't know how or why the early phases of the Soviet Union appeared, at least from the outside, to be going so well that someone like Hitler would admire them. I don't know if that's. Do you have a sense of why or how that was happening? Was it just like moving people into cities and sort of force industrializing?
Okay. If you come from a more and most agricultural background and you started industrialization and you do it with this iron fist with a force, even a lot of people and peasants were killed, millions, and you fought them like slaves. Of course, you can get on the short run some great results on the first hand. But yes, this was what Hitler admired. There's one quote from him about Stalin in his inner circle. Of course, he didn't say it in public. He said, "Here, there's a state, and at the top of the state, there's a man with an iron fist." And he says, "Are 13 million dead people, is it too much for a great idea?" And this is what he admired with Stalin. So, of course, if you use absolute force to bring people to do what they don't want to do voluntarily, in the short run, maybe over a couple of years, you can have some results. But if it is about, for example, what is for modern capitalism, creativity, you can't go to someone like Steve Jobs, for example. Now do this, yes. This is from the government, yes. Where is it? Yes. This is not the way how it works. Maybe you can do it in traditional industry with workers to force them to do like working like slaves. But on the long run, it works much better if people work voluntarily for their own interest, as it is in capitalism.
How do you define what capitalism is? Because I think that when we talk about these sorts of things, the definitions become very important, especially because the people that want some perfect version of communism or socialism, whatever they have in their head is doesn't seem to have a relevance to history. And the same is true for fascism, National Socialism, capitalism. Everybody kind of comes up with their own definition that is always conveniently not the real thing that's ever been tried.
Okay, yes, very, very good question. First of all, there is no pure capitalism, and there is no pure, was no pure socialism nowhere in the world. In the reality, we have mixed systems. I will compare it with a test tube with two ingredients, market and state, and capitalism and socialism, and everything is a mixture. Even in North Korea, you find, of course, only very little bit private property, and in the GDR, in East Germany, you had, or Poland, some private property, not much. And of course, in countries in Germany, they think the United States is pure capitalism. Of course, we know it's crazy. It's not. You have a lot of socialism here in the United States. So in reality, both are mixed systems. There is no pure capitalism everywhere in the world. And even I don't believe in a kind of utopia of, like some libertarians, of a pure capitalist system. So I think we should add more in the test tube, more market. This is what we should do. And if you look in the reality, if you analyze countries, and this is my approach, I have it here in this book, The Power of Capitalism. If you want to analyze history, it's very important to understand what happens if you add more state or more market in this test tube. I will give you maybe examples, because it's very important to understand this concept because it's different what some other people think. First example, if you add more state, it is Venezuela. Venezuela was in the 70s one of the 20 richest countries in the world. And then they started with regulation, labor market regulation, more and more. Things became worse. And then they made a big mistake. In the end of the 90s, they voted for Hugo Chavez with the socialism of the 21st century. And then he started with all this crazy stuff, nationalization and so on. You know how it ended. Now, 8 million people fled from Venezuela. This is, I think, 28% of the population. The inflation rate some years ago was 1 million %. A total disaster, what happened there. So you see what happens if you add more state. In contrast, Vietnam. Vietnam was, in the 90s, or the beginning of the 90s, the poorest country in the world. Poorer than all African countries. First, they had the war, not only with the United States, with France, with Japan, with China. And what was not destroyed by the war was destroyed by the planned economy. And then they started with economic reforms in the end of the 80s. They introduced private property. They opened the economy for foreign investors. They stopped a lot of, not all, regulation. They privatized something, not everything. And what happened? The number of people living in poverty decreased from 80% in 1990 to 5% today. Why? Because they added more capitalism, more market, even in China. A lot of people speak about China as a communist country. No, China is also a mixed economy. It was like maybe 98% socialism in Mao's time. I spoke about the Great Leap Forward when 45 million people died.
Yes.
And even in 1981, 88% of the population in China lived in extreme poverty. 88%. Today it's less than 1%. Why? Because Deng Xiaoping started in the beginning of the 80s with free market reforms. Private property was introduced, and he said, let some people become rich. And today you have as many billionaires in China as no country in the world, with the exception of the United States. Some years ago, there were even more billionaires in China as in the United States. And they had this growth. And I give you these examples for one reason. It's not possible to speak about pure capitalism, pure socialism. Everywhere we have in the reality mixed systems. And I don't believe, like maybe some other libertarians, in the utopia of 100% capitalist system, because I don't believe in any kind of utopia. When I discuss with socialists, I ask them, so, you tell me something about socialism. Where is it, or where was it? Was it in China? Was it in the Soviet Union, or in Venezuela, or in North Korea, or in Romania, or in Bulgaria, or in Vietnam? Oh, no, this wasn't real socialism. This was, but where is it? Show me. And then they show me a book. It's here in this book. Okay, if you compare the reality with the book, the same thing as if I would compare your real-life marriage with a romantic love novel. Imagine you come home this evening and your wife says, we have to talk maybe about divorce. Why? She started to read romantic love novels. And she tells you, this is not as it is there in this romantic love novel. You would say, it's crazy. Please compare our marriage with others. And this is what I do in my books, like this book, The Power of Capitalism, for example. I compare East and West Germany. I compare North and South Korea. I compare Chile and Venezuela. I compare China in Mao's time, China today. This is what I do as an historian. And then I look whether You give more market or more state in the test. So the great thing with capitalism is you don't need pure capitalism. Even some drops of capitalism helps to improve so much the situation of people living in poverty, especially for poor people. It's so important.
How does that work in the most simple terms? Why would a couple extra drops of private property and market competition and entrepreneurship, the elements of capitalism, why is that such a potent force? Because you're right. And one other example, which I'm quite familiar with, is India before the 1990s reforms, where they had 5-year planning and they had democratic socialism. Yes. And then in the 90s, and they had basically decades of just absolute stagnation, total poverty, Mother Teresa going to care for the poor because it was like the poster child for poverty. In the 1990s, they allow more open foreign trade.
Absolutely.
They reduce what was called the licensing Raj, which is this very regulatory state. And India takes off, and 8-9% growth, and 300 million plus people are lifted out of poverty.
Yeah. But before I come to the answer to your question, I will do, because you spoke about India, it's a good example, because a lot of people think that the solution for poverty is redistribution or, on an international scale, development aid. And that is wrong. I give you only one argument. Africa received much more development aid in comparison with Asian countries. But Africa is already still the poorest continent. And why? In Asia, you spoke about India, I spoke about Vietnam and China, and of course Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, all these countries.
South Korea.
Yes, South Korea. South Korea was in the 60s as poor as African countries today. And then they decided for capitalism, and now it's trade. I've been there several times. There's big shopping centers and all what you see there, and it's one of the leading export countries. So you see what helped them was economic reforms, capitalism. This is what helped them to escape poverty. India, China, Vietnam, and all these countries, and not redistribution. And when you ask what helps, before I come to the hard economic facts, I will talk about something that is very often underestimated by economists. And this is the mindset and the attitude. For example, in China, when Deng Xiaoping started with his reforms, he had one slogan: let some people become rich first. They admire rich people. It was good to become wealthy. And in Vietnam, it's much more. They're crazy about becoming rich. I commissioned a survey for this book here. Yes, I commissioned a survey in Vietnam, and I did it in a lot of other countries, and there's no other country where people admire so much rich people as they do in Vietnam. They invited me for a workshop at the Foreign Trade University in Hanoi. The topic was, how can we improve the image of wealthy people? I was never invited in the United States or in Europe to such a workshop. So this mental thing is very important, because in the moment when some people become rich and they become role models for the others, they say, okay, if I do something, I can also become rich. And this is what people want in China. So this is very important, that rich people are no longer scapegoats, as they are in France, for example, Germany, also for some people in the United States, but that they become role models. This is very, very important. The next thing, if I speak now only about the mindset, what is very important, don't blame other people or other countries for your problems. This is the same for an individual as it is for a country. If you want to change your life, first you have to change your mindset. And as long as you blame other people, I'm a victim of racism, of sexism, of capitalism, and all this stuff, these people will never be successful, this victim mentality. But this is not only true for individuals, it's also true for countries. Again, Vietnam. They could blame, of course, the United States for their situation, because there were 10 times more bombs and explosives from the United States on Vietnam than in the whole Second World War on Germany. And so many people were killed. They could blame the United, but they didn't do it. They love Americans today. They're, okay, we made a mistake. Our economic system was wrong. We have to implement some economic reforms. In contrast, a lot of African countries, I have friends in Nigeria and Uganda, they tell me, our government says, it is colonialism and slavery, things that are 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and now we need a lot of development aid, but this doesn't change. So these things, I analyze it in my books, are very often underestimated by economists in the mindset. But of course, it's also hard facts. I'll give you one example. In these countries, in most of cases, these were agricultural societies where most of the peoples were peasants. And they had, in some cases, a little bit like 5% of the land they owned themselves. For example, this was in Vietnam, 5%. And then they saw that in this 5% of the land, they had a better output and result than the rest, 95%, that was owned by collectives, because it was their self-interest, yes, their self-interest. And this is the big problem with all this, if it is state-owned, that there is no longer any self-interest. And if capitalism emerged, it's not top-down thing. It's not that, in history, when capitalism came into being, it was not this way that Adam Smith wrote a book, he gave it to a politician, and he read it, okay, it's good, now let's start capitalism. It was not this way. Capitalism emerged more like plants or like animals, as a spontaneous development. This is what Hayek underlined very often. And this is what happened, for example, if you go now more to what in the last decades, I spoke about China, I spoke about Vietnam. Even before the state started with its economic reforms, rural peasants, did it by themselves. They left their collectives. It was illegal. But
in China, you're talking about.
Yeah, China and Vietnam, the same. They were they had to do it because they had hunger. They were the only alternative. So they started with illegal things, left the collectives and came back to private property. And then they saw it worked. And what the government did, the government was only they legalized it. They allowed it. Okay, go on. Before it was forbidden. And so you see, this is a big difference. You have to understand it between capitalism on the one hand and socialism on the other hand. This is the reason why intellectuals don't like capitalism, because intellectuals like socialism because it's like system construction. And even Lenin said that the socialism is never a result from the workers' movement, but from intellectuals. And the intellectuals, they have to convince the workers that it is a good system. And this is the difference that capitalism is not a construction, but socialism. I give you another example for this crazy idea to construct the perfect society. You know what happened in Cambodia? That's with this Khmer Rouge. 25% of the population were killed in a couple of years. And a lot of people think, these were crazy, very primitive people who did it. No, they were not. These were intellectuals. They studied in Paris at elite university. They wrote even their doctoral dissertation about perfect socialism. And then they went back to Cambodia to implement this idea in this society. So this is intellectuals, they like this construction. But this is not a way that a society and that the economy works.
I'm familiar with that Chinese case because here in the States, a little over a decade ago, NPR actually did a story about one of these villages in China who were being told by the communist government, sort of local governors, that you don't even own the teeth in your mouth. They are owned by the people, the collective. And yet they risked death to reinstitute keeping the surplus of your work, having the fruits of your labor be yours, not some communist way, as a matter of private property. This is my land. I'm going to farm it. I'm going to keep the product of my land. And as you said, in this one area, and they detail it with firsthand accounts, the productivity of the same people in the same land with the same resources shot up so dramatically that it was impossible to hide what they were doing.
Yes.
They risked
Exactly
being taken out into a field and just shot. And that's how bad socialism is, that people will invent capitalism whole cloth to escape it under the threat of being shot. There's a writer here in the States named Naomi Klein. She has a book.
I know her from Canada. Yes.
Yeah, I guess that's right. She is Canadian. Although I guess, American left-wingers like her. She wrote this book, The Shock Doctrine. And in that book, she attempts to claim that pro-market reforms are only ever imposed in a period of shock, and that it's all sort of a crypto Milton Friedman Koch brothers plot that gets that Javier Milei is not the product of the people of Argentina being sick and tired of decades of their country being destroyed by left-wing Peronism. No, it's actually the shock doctrine. But what you're saying refutes that in every continent of this planet, right?
Yeah, but in a way, it's not wrong. Of course, her conclusion is wrong. Free market reforms, unfortunately, they happen in most cases when everything was a total disaster before. It would be much better if people understand, even if in a country that works fairly well, let's do some free market reforms to have it even better. But this is not what happened. I have examples here in my book, The Power of Capitalism. UK, for example, in the 70s, it was a total disaster. So many people had no job, a high inflation rate, and even the International Monetary Fund that supports usually developing countries had to support the UK. And it was a total disaster. And only then came Maggie Thatcher to do their economic reforms. We spoke about China, or we spoke about Vietnam, that had to be the poorest country in the world. And now in Argentina with Javier Milei. I know, to be honest, not a single case where everything goes more or less well, and then somebody say, okay, let's try a little bit more capitalism. But on the other hand, and this is very important to understand, it doesn't happen automatically that when things became very bad, that it will turn to become better. History is not like a Hollywood movie with a happy ending as a guarantee. There are other examples. I spoke about Venezuela when things became worse because of their regulation, and then they made it even more worse with voting for Hugo Chavez, or Germany in the 30s, yes, when we had 6 million people without jobs and this crisis, and it was not the beginning of a free market revolution, but it was the beginning of National Socialism. And so you see, but yes, it's true. This is one precondition for economic reforms, is that things become worse before, but it's not enough. You have to add another thing. The other thing that is very important is how people think. I know a lot. You spoke about Argentina. I've been there several times. I will go there next month. I will here promote this book because Milei's spokesman wrote the foreword for the Spanish edition of the book, and I will promote it there. So I know a lot about Milei and his movement. And it was all prepared by free market think tanks before. This was the same in the UK. Before they had the economic reforms with Maggie Thatcher, there were institutions like, for example, the Adam Smith Institute or the Institute of Economic Affairs. And in the United States, before Ronald Reagan started his reforms, there were the ideas of Milton Friedman, there was a Cato Institute and others. So without this, it had a politician. On the end, he's important in a way. He has to have a talent to communicate with people like Ronald Reagan or like Maggie Thatcher or Javier Milei. But there has to be two things. There has to be a crisis, And the situation has to be very, very bad, that people start to hear that they are open for other ideas, but then it has to be prepared with these ideas. And so both of this is important.
That's a perfect segue back to Adolf Hitler and the Germany of National Socialism, because you have post-World War I, the Weimar Republic, a horrible hyperinflation and collapse. And instead of going a liberal way with a Javier Milei type character, here comes Adolf Hitler, who is obviously like a very effective communicator. Where is he drawing his ideas from? What is, if as you said, if Margaret Thatcher and others in our modern time had think tanks and such to draw on for ideas, where is Hitler coming up with his vision for the German economy?
Yes, first of all, what a lot of people don't know, they think about Adolf Hitler as someone only like shouting and like being crazy, being insane, because you have, when he had a speech about 2 hours, and there were maybe 2 minutes when he was really this way, but not the whole speech. It's not possible. So they thought he was very irrational, and that he didn't have any kind of philosophy. But
that he was just a madman, just a
yes, like a madman. But this is not true. Hitler read a lot of books. He had thousands of books, and every night he did, reading books about history, about economy, about politics, about military things. And there was a movement in the Weimar Republic. It was called the Conservative Revolution. It was called this way, and they had some of these ideas, like they called it a third way between capitalism on the one hand and socialism on the other, or communism on the other. This is what he also wanted. So this was how he saw his movement, as an alternative to communism on the one hand and capitalism on the one hand. So, and he had ideas about the economy. Before, first I have to tell you a little bit what I did for my book. It was this book, Capitalism and National Socialism, was my first doctoral dissertation. You have 2 PhDs, one in history, the other in sociology, and this was in history. And I was the first one to analyze first his 2 books. He wrote Mein Kampf, but there's also another book that was never published in his life. He wrote it in 1928. You call it Hitler's second book. But all of his speeches, I analyzed every speech. I was the first one to read all of his speeches. And this time it was not easy, because today you have a scientific edition for historians, all of his speeches. I had to go to all of his archives and to read and photocopy the transcriptions of his speeches, make photocopies from all these newspapers where his speeches were published. And then, in addition to this, he wrote also a lot of essays. I copied these. And then, what is very important, there are the so-called table talks of Adolf Hitler, or his monologues in the Führer headquarters. What is this? Every evening, almost every evening, he spent some hours in the night. He went to bed very late, like 3 in the morning or something like this, but he went up only at 11 a.m. And he was sitting there with his staff and even with his assistants, and spoke all the time about history, about economy, about politics, about women, about religion, about everything. And everyone had to sit there on the table and listen to him. Sometimes people were really tired because it was 2 or 3 in the morning, but you can't say, "Oh, I heard it before and I'm too tired, go to bed." No, if the Führer is speaking, you have to sit there and listen. Very interesting. Yes. And there was one, Martin Bormann, his name, and he took notes. And why is this important? We know what he really thought, because he said it in his inner circle, And what I did for my book, I compared the things that he wrote in his books and in his speeches on the one hand, and his inner circle. And in some ways, it's consistent. It's the same, what he said in his propaganda and in his inner circle. But there's also a difference. And especially, I give you one very example. I mentioned it before, his attitude towards Stalin. and the Soviet Union. Of course, when he was in war with the Soviet Union and with Stalin, you could hear not a single positive word about Stalin from him in public in his speeches. It was the enemy. But when he spoke in his inner circle, it was forbidden to say something negative about Stalin, even if someone mentioned that he was a bank robber. Before what he was, Stalin. Hitler interrupted him. No, he did it only for revolution. Don't say something like this. And if there was a picture with a cigar in the mouth, he said, no, don't take this picture, because he admired him. There are a lot of quotes from him in his table talks where he said, Stalin, in his way, is a genius. He knows his role models like Genghis Khan, and what he did in the economy is great. He said, there was no poverty in the Soviet Union as in the United States, for example, and they had gigantic factories, and they had this great 4-year plans. And then it was more and more his idea. He said, after we won the war, we have to go much more in the direction of a planned economy, because only a planned economy will solve our problems. So this was his plan. Of course, in the time of the war, he couldn't have this huge conflicts with entrepreneurs. Sometimes they had it, yes, but it was not the real time. But he said very often, after we won the war, and he believed a lot of time for a long time that he will win the war, we will go more and more in this direction of a planned economy. And so for this is very important to understand. This is how he thought. Yes, and he took the ideas. He had no high school or what you'd call German or an Austrian Abitur, and he never studied. He was like an autodidact. So he read books and books and books and books and then he put it all together in a system. And what he said, and this is important, he said, nationalism and socialism is the same. It's the same because it means the priority of politics, the priority of the state. And there's one very important speech. He says, a lot of people think that first there's the individual interest, and then as a result of all these individual interests, there's the common interest, like Adam Smith said in his book, The Wealth of Nations. And he said, this is totally wrong. It's exactly the opposite. First, there's the common interest, and the individual interest is to be, subordinated to this. You had in Germany some slogans at this time. One was Gemeinwohl vor Eigenwohl. This means common good before individual good. This was the slogan, Gemeinwohl vor Eigenwohl. Or another slogan was, Du bist nichts, dein Volk ist alles. It means you are nothing, your people is everything. Yes, du bist nichts, dein Volk ist alles.
Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
A little bit like this, but I don't want to compare JFK, with other. But of course, this is the opposite of the Ayn Rand philosophy or the Adam Smith philosophy was Adolf Hitler's philosophy. That first there's the nation, the collective, and so he says, yes, in a way, nationalism, it's the same as socialism. It's about that it's the politic is on the first hand and the economy is on the second hand. And this was his philosophy. And yes, the real problem is that a lot of politicians think this way, even today.
One of the conflicts that I'm aware of, and at the time in the streets, was a conflict between the young National Socialists and communists who believed in a sort of international revolution.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And some people interpret Hitler to be fundamentally closer to Reagan than to Stalin because he was in a battle and his people were in a battle with the communists. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, but this is absolutely wrong. Reagan is a free market thinker and pro-democracy against any form of totalitarian thinking. And communists and National Socialists, they competed. They were rivals against democracy, against capitalism. They were more rivals. And Hitler had fear about the communists. He only took them serious. He thought that how they called them, the bourgeoisie, the bourgeois parties, as very weak, and the communists and the workers as strong. And he said, we have to win these people to come over, the workers, the communists, because they are strong. Because in his worldview, what was social Darwinism, it was only between the strong and then the weak one. And for them, the bourgeois system was weak. So the only really threat for him was communism, and he admired the communists in a lot of way. He adapted a lot with his with their rallies, and so even in Mein Kampf he wrote that he analyzed why they were successful, and then he, for example, the Workers' Day that is in Germany, the 1st of May, what is a free, you don't have to work there. I think in the United States it's not this way. I think you have to work on the 1st of May.
Yeah, there's no...
but in Germany, today you don't have to work there on the 1st of May. This was always the day of the fight and struggle from the communist movement. But one of the first things Hitler did, he made it a free day in Germany for everyone. So he adapted some of the ideas and some of the methods from the communists, because he thought they are much more successful than the other ones. They are stronger. And he said, I tried always to win the people from the far left, because they were real fighters, really strong, and not like this coward, bourgeois, tolerant, because tolerance was for him a very bad word, like tolerance. Yes? He admired people when he wanted to praise something, when he wanted to praise, speak positive about someone. He said, oh, he was a really fanatic. Yes, fanatic means this is great. He was a real fanatic, like for far left. This is the people that we need for our movement. So they competed each other in their fight, both against free market economy, against capitalism. So it's very wrong. I know there's an interpretation that Hitler was, his real enemy was communism. No, his real enemy was democracy, liberal democracy, and capitalism. And his competitor in the fight against, who will succeed in the fight against democracy, who will win in the fight against capitalism. This is his movement. In the end of his life, in 1994, he met Mussolini, the fascist leader from Italy, and he said to him, capitalism has no future. The future will be National Socialism, Fascism, and maybe Bolshevism, communism in the East. Maybe even at this time he was not 100% sure to win totally, so, and maybe Bolshevism would remain. So this is what you have to understand, that it's a misunderstanding that Hitler's real purpose was to overcome communism. Communism was his enemy, is but more in the way of a rival of two totalitarian movements that both go against capitalism. And there are other interpretations. For example, maybe you heard about the German historian Ernst Nolte. In a way, I like him, and I met him several times. And he had this theory that National Socialism was all against communism, but I don't believe so. Sometimes people ask, why was his fight stronger against the communists, against this bourgeois forces? Because he didn't take the other serious. He thought, okay, these people, forget them. They are not strong. These are weak people. And he had fear, yes, from communists, but because he in his worldview, he is always very important to understand. He had only this thinking: strong and weak, and strong and weak. Communists strong. Workers strong, bourgeoisie, capitalism weak. This is how he thought.
I think this framing that you're describing, this celebration of strength over weakness, over, cowardliness or softness. This might be the area in the way Donald Trump speaks that gets people triggered so much, because he does use the language of strength and the admiration of strength in his rhetoric quite a bit.
Yes.
Even in terms of on the international stage, even in terms of talking about someone like Vladimir Putin. And I'm I'm not in the crowd of people who's obsessed with some notion that there's a crypto Russian thing going on with Donald Trump. But just as objectively, that notion of being strong is something Trump clearly puts forward in his rhetoric. And even there was a recent interview with this podcast of tech billionaires. Basically, it's called the All In podcast, and one of the I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head, but one of the people in this group had attended a dinner with Donald Trump, and he said, it's really surprising. Like in a private dinner, he's actually quite warm, and he even sort of opens the conversation up to the crowd and listens and is friendly. He's much softer and more empathetic, and
sure, I can imagine this.
Then he is. He goes out and he's all strong, win. We're going to win. We're strong, strength. And so how do you interpret the rhetoric in America around Donald Trump and the comparisons to Hitler? And for someone who's gotten their mind sort of like worked up to thinking we are on the verge of having Hitler 2.0, what do you have to say to them?
So I want to differentiate. Of course, it's always difficult to compare someone with Hitler, because someone who killed 6 million Jewish people started a war, and if you compare it. But of course, there are things, as you said, that are in a way similar. And also a little bit how Donald Trump thinks about the economy. He's not a free market guy for the economy. He always thinks a little bit like where I tell the people what they have to do. Yes. On the other hand, Donald Trump did some good things, some deregulation, some lowering taxes because members of his parties won. And of course, I think in a way he admires people as Putin, or maybe even from North Korea, Kim, who he thinks that they are strong. But I don't believe that Putin is strong. He's not strong. Putin is a loser with atomic weapons. This is the real. If you look about the economy, even before he started the war, the GDP from Russia was less than Italy. And this is the biggest, there's no country in the world with so much resources and commodities as Russia is. And they depend only on their oil and gas, as some developing countries. Do you know any products, maybe a little bit in the militaries, but we in Germany, we have our cars and so on. You have your Apple there and your Facebook and your Google, and also the Chinese, they have some great, companies. But which Russian companies do you know? Vodka maybe, so they have a poor economy, and no one would ever listen to someone like Vladimir Putin or Kim in Korea if they didn't have atomic weapons. It's like a little bit in the school, yes, where you have some really smart, intelligent people, and then you have some who are only strong this way, yes, and you have fear from them, but only this is the only weapon that they have, their force. So I don't think that Putin he's only in a way strong because he's aggressive and he has all this, weapons. But if you wouldn't have them, he's not strong in a way. Even, I think he has a lot of fear because the situation for people in Russia is really bad. And sometimes these dictators, they start wars to bring the people in their country together. We know it from history. There are other cases when dictators started a war because they were weak inside, and it was the only way to bring the people in the country together. But this is the way how I see it. I think there's some reason that Donald Trump, maybe he has a total different view. It's complicated in the United States to speak. It's another topic about Donald Trump. I found it out here when I spoke with the people, because most of the people are this way. Either he's the God. If you criticize anything, oh no, everything is great what Donald Trump does. And for others, it's the evil. He's evil, the devil. And when you say, but he did some good things, he did some deregulation, no, everything he did was wrong. And if you have, like I have, a more differentiated position and say, some things are good, good that he did. Sometimes are really crazy in a way. It's hard because in the end, maybe it will be a result now from this interview. You have only enemies because the people from, who love Trump, they say, oh, he criticized him. And the people who are saying, oh, he said something positive about Trump. But okay, I allow myself to have a more differentiated position.
There's something going on. Let me just say this. On a personal level, my worry in 2016 kind of came true. And that was that, my first worry was that Trump had been a lifelong Democrat. And
for different parties even, yes?
Yes.
Different convictions, yes. Independent, Democrat, everything, yes.
And he was, he ran with the Clintons, and there was no reason to believe that Donald Trump would do anything that was, from a political policy perspective, conservative in 2016. It was weird that he was even running as a Republican. It was like, oh, maybe he's just gotten old and grumpy and now he's a Republican. It wasn't clear because he was always a Democrat, So I was actually pleasantly surprised by his presidency insofar as he did a lot more, and maybe this was just the people he hired. He was more of a traditional Republican in terms of policy than it looked like he would.
I think the people, the party, the people, the donors and people who support him, that you have to bring taxes down and do some deregulation. Oh, did some good things. But I think the difference between Trump and, I don't want to compare him with Hitler because there are so many things different. Also, Hitler was someone very, he believed in an ideology and he had a worldview. All of his life, it was very consistent what he thought. Yes, this was the ideology he believed in, and these people are very, very dangerous. Trump, I think he has no ideology. The only thing he believes in that is me, his power, yes, like Machiavellist, yes, or opportunist, yes. It's about power. It's about being famous, yes. It's about and these things. So in some ways, these politicians are better than fanatic people with an ideology. In some ways, they are dangerous. My favorite politician to say this here, I'm a fan of Ronald Reagan in everything that he did. I think the United States would need someone like him who believed really in the market economy, who believed in capitalism, and also in his international politics. He was really strong. And without him, the defeat of communism, also the unification of my country, of Germany, wouldn't have been possible. And I think this is what I think. He was, for me, the greatest president in the last 100 years in the United States.
The unification of Germany is a really interesting thing that has started to vanish from thought. At least in terms of dialogue and discourse. When we talk about comparing systems, there's these satellite evening photographs that have been taken.
North and South Korea.
Yes, North and South Korea. So South Korea covered in lights. That's wealth, that's industry, that's the ability to read at night. North Korea, dark as a closet. It's absolutely nothing.
Yes.
There's a couple of specks. West Germany, East Germany used to be the same thing.
Not as extreme.
Not as bad.
But of course, yes, it's a good topic because, here in my book, The Power of Capitalism, I analyze it and I produced also film. This is live behind the Berlin Wall. You can get it for free on YouTube. It's only 17 minutes. I compared East and West Germany. And this is a perfect example because the same country, the same culture, the same language, the same history, the same people, only different economic system. So you can compare it.
It's a perfect natural experiment.
Yes, perfect. And I give you only one example. When the GDR came to an end in 1989.
For those that don't know the history, GDR, what does that mean?
East Germany, Socialists, yes. They called themselves the German Democratic Republic, yes.
It's always Democratic Republic with the...
Always, yes, it's always democratic, like North Korea also. So, and then, for example, 16% of the population owned a telephone. And in West Germany, 99% had a telephone. Or another thing, today, anti-capitalists tell us, capitalism is a cause of climate change and for environmental problems, and we have to fight against capitalism to stop these problems with climate change. Exactly the opposite is true. The CO2 emissions in East Germany were 3 times higher, adjusted to GDP, of course, than in West Germany, 3 times higher. And for other airborne pollutants, it was even more, sulfur dioxide, 10 times more in the GDR than in West Germany. And you have another example. Even in 1989, 27% of the people in East Germany had not their own toilet. They had to share it with other tenants. And this brings us back a little bit to National Socialism, because there are some continuities between both. In East Germany, there was a rent freeze. And a lot of people, socialists, young people, they like this. Oh, rent freeze sounds good. Yes.
Yeah, rent control. Like, oh, the rents are too damn high. Let's just have the government tell people they can't go any higher.
And this is what Adolf Hitler did. He gave it to his people as a present to his 47th birthday, this rent freeze. And then the GDR, they took the same, they followed up. It was the same law, in the GDR. And of course, the rents were very low, but the result was that it was a total disaster, because there was no money for any maintenance or modernization, and a lot of them were, 40% were severely damaged, and 10% were even uninhabitable. So this was the result. So there are some continuities also between National Socialism we talk about, and then later the GDR. The rent control, the rent freeze is only one of these examples.
Milton Friedman, I think it was Milton Friedman that said, put pictures up and said, guess which image is a war-torn building and which one is the result of rent control.
Yes.
Because they would both look debilitated and destroyed.
Yes, absolutely, and no, even socialism, in a way, if it is for some decades, it's worse than a war. It takes longer to rebuild it. It was very difficult for us in Germany. It took billions and billions, more than 80 billion euros, to rebuild it all. No, and or another example. Sometimes I ask people, what do you think? How long did you have to wait for a car in East Germany? Do you know what would you guess? So how long do you have to wait? You have to put on the list.
Years. I heard it was years.
Yes. Most people think, 3 months or how long? No. The shortest time was 12 and a half years.
12 and a half?
Between 12 and a half and 17 years. This was how long you had to wait. Of course, you could buy a used one, but it was even more expensive than a new one. And in contrast, in West Germany, you could go to the next car dealership and take it away the same afternoon. And the difference is in West Germany, where you could get it so fast, you could get a Mercedes or BMW or Volkswagen. In the GDR, they were famous to produce the worst car in the world. They called it the Trabi, yes? But you had to wait for it. So I think it's so crystal clear that capitalism is better for the environment, especially for poor people. This is what a lot of people don't understand. They think capitalism is good for rich people. No, the strong people, they come along in every system, even in a dictatorship. They come along anyway, for the poor, or they can leave the country, say, I don't like it here. How, for example, in France now, there's they voted for left government, and they have done now the idea to tax all people who own more than 400,000 euros the year with 90%.
That's going to go great.
Yes. The result is that, of course, now rich people think, okay, let's leave there, let's go somewhere else where it's better. So poor people can't do it. Yes, they have no alternative. For poor people, the only thing is capitalism. And this is, what is here the topic of my book, How Nations Escape Poverty. I started with Adam Smith. I know Adam Smith was not right in everything he wrote. There's a lot of criticism from Rothbard and others, and they are not wrong. But in one way, he was absolutely correct. In his book, The Wealth of Nations, he his topic was poverty. How can a nation escape poverty? You find very few sentences positive about rich people, more negative sentences.
Yeah.
But you find a lot about for poor people. And his theory was that the only way to escape poverty is economic growth. And the precondition for economic growth is economic freedom. And in this way, he was absolutely right. And he's confirmed by history, because what almost most people do not know, I see it in my lectures. 200 years ago, before capitalism, 90% of the worldwide population lived in extreme poverty. 90%. Today it's 8.5%, less than that. And this never happened before in history, especially in the last decades. Even in the beginning of the 80s, 43% of the worldwide population lived in extreme poverty. So it's the greatest time ever what happened in the last decades. In contrast to what, for example, left-wing economists like Thomas Piketty tell us. His theory, he cares about inequality. Yes,
he seems to be really good at lying, Thomas Piketty.
I would say it in a different way. He has completely different priorities. He doesn't care about poverty. It's not a topic for him. He cares about inequality. I don't care about inequality. This is a topic for envious people, inequality. My topic is poverty. And I will, and you know, what he says in the most time of the 20th century, it was good because inequality decreased as a result of the wars, for example. But then he said the bad time started in the 90s when the gap between the poor and the rich became bigger. For me, this is the best time in history because this is the time when so many people escape poverty. And you know, we spoke about China, about Vietnam. I was there several times. I found no one who told me, oh, let's go back to Mao's time because we were more equal. Of course they were more equal if you, this measure with the Gini coefficient and so, of course they were more equal. There were no billionaires in China at this time. Maybe Mao was a millionaire, but there was not a single billionaire. Today you have so many billionaires. And this is also something that is important. If you analyze the last decades, I spoke about it, the number of people living in poverty decreased from 43% in the beginning of the 80s to 8.5% today. At the same time, the number of billionaires increased. And for example, in 2000, we had 500 billionaires. Today, we have 2,700 billionaires. And why is this important? Because socialists believe what I call the zero-sum belief, the zero-sum thinking. They believe that rich people become only rich because they took it away from the poor. But
there's some fixed pot of wealth.
A big cake, not to make the cake bigger, but the fixed. But if this would be true, you don't have to be a genius in mathematics to understand if at the same time the number of people living in poverty decreases and the number of billionaires increases, where should they take it from? It's not logical. And this zero-sum belief is also wrong if you see it in an international concern, you know, that people think African countries are poor because Western countries exploited them and they are responsible because of colonialism and all this stuff. And so their conclusion is we should give them back because we stole it from them. But this is not true. The reason why they are poor is the lack of economic freedom. And they would be rich if they start with, you know, of course, first the rule of law. This is very important. It's a precondition for economic freedom, the rule of law. And then economic freedom. And this helped every country so far. And it will help also in Argentina. We spoke about them. If people in Argentina are patient enough. This is the next thing that you have to understand. Here in my book, How Nations Escape Poverty, I analyzed not only Vietnam, I analyzed Poland. And Poland was, in the 80s, one of the poorest countries in Europe. And then they started with free market reforms in 1990. Since 3 decades, Poland is Europe's growth champion. So the man who was responsible for these reforms, his name is Balcerowicz. He was also a professor for economics. He believes in the same as Javier Milei, in Hayek and Mises. the personality is totally different. Yes, but they have the same belief system, and so and when I will go to Argentina in the next month and to promote the Spanish version of the book there, I wrote a forward and I told them, you see two things with Poland. First, economic reforms work. They are successful. You can escape poverty this way. But more important, you have to be patient because first, some things will become worse. For example, hidden unemployment become open unemployment. And in Poland, there were 2 years with negative GDP, with a decline of the GDP. This is always what happens. It was the same when Maggie Thatcher started their economic reforms. And this is what I want to tell people, and I hope they listen to it in Argentina, to have to be patient. You can't solve problems that will cost about decades and decades. You can't fix them in a half year and not even in a year. You have to give him a few years of time, and then it will work as it worked everywhere in the world. And I hope that it will work in Argentina, because if it works, we will have a capitalist revolution all about Latin America, because the poor people in Venezuela or in Colombia, in other countries, in Brazil, they will look, okay, it works there. But if he will not succeed, and it can happen if people are not patient, yes, that will be very hard for our ideas, because everyone's like, oh, you see, he tried it, this crazy capitalist, libertarian ideas, they do not work. And so we should cross fingers, very important, that he will be successful.
So here we are, it's 2024. We have decades and decades and decades of natural experiments across every continent in which the same people were divided by a wall, like East Germany and West Germany. One side rich and wealthy, just focusing on the bottom 25%, the poorest people. The poorest people in West Germany living a better life than the richest people that weren't in the political class in East Germany. North Korea, South Korea. Vietnam, pre-post. India, pre-1990s, Hindu rate of growth, 5-year planning, democratic socialism, post-1990, taking off like a rocket. We come to Africa, which is now, as I understand it, and Africa has many different countries with different levels of economic development and policies. I understand many countries in Africa are actually growing quite quickly now. But Africa has the worst colonial export of all, Marxism. Marxism was not some innate African philosophy. It is a European colonial export. And yet we are told as liberals, as free market people, that we are the colonialists, that not the Marxists who've pushed radical nonsense on people in South America and in Africa. The colonial question is that much weirder, because if colonialism was so awesome, why is Spain a poor basket case compared to Germany or the UK?
Or even the United States was a colony. Your success in the United States didn't depend on having a lot of colonists.
India was colonized by Britain, and for decades after independence remained desperately poor, and then only a political change towards freer markets caused the growth. Why does this ideology survive?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a funny thing. I never saw it before, but next time when I discuss with some of this post-colonialism and whatever, people or Marxists are, yes, you're right. It's Western society is to blame for things that happened in Africa and all these countries. We are guilty. Yes, you're right, because we exported this Marxism to these countries. But by the way, why is that? Because if it is so crystal clear as we had it there, yes, if it is so crystal clear, why is that? 2 reasons. First, these people are much better than we are, the anti-capitalists, in marketing and public relation, and we should learn from them. They are much better, especially with emotions. Now, we have all these facts, these arguments. I tell you, GDP per capita increased so much. They have the emotions. I remember a few months ago, I've been in Greece, and it was after a train accident where 50 people died. Of course, capitalism was to blame for this, as always. There were big protests.
Because capitalism invented trains, I guess.
And there were big protests, and I was in the hotel. And the hotel was next to the parliament. And in the Sunday, I looked there, the protesters, and I saw them, and they sung half of the time songs, beautiful songs. I couldn't understand because I don't know Greece, but for your heart, yes? And then I said to my girlfriend who was on my side, do you see what's the problem? I have all the facts in my books, but they have the emotions. And what do you think? What is stronger? And so we should learn a lot from the anti-capitalists. They are much better in marketing and public relation. And I know a lot of think tanks. We have too many thinkers. I have a theory. I have here this Hayek. I have here this other Mises quote and this pricing theory. And so not interesting for most of them. For me, yes. But for most of the people, you have to explain it to them, our philosophy, in a simple way. And I think this is a little bit my talent. I told you when I was in Argentina, maybe another funny story. I had a lecture there with young people in the beginning of the 20s. And, these Argentinians believed always in the state. I want to get everything free from the state. The government is responsible for my life. But now it started to change. And I explained it in a different way, not with abstract theory. There was a young man, beginning of the 20s, sitting in the first row. And he was not really handsome, so I thought maybe he has no girlfriend. I asked him, hey, do you have a girlfriend? No, I don't have. Would you love to have a really beautiful girlfriend? Oh, yes, she said. And then I asked him, what do you expect who will bring you this beautiful girlfriend? The government? The state? He laughed. No, I don't believe so. And then I asked him, but what do you think? Who's responsible for getting this beautiful girlfriend? And he says, I think that's me. Yes, you got it. This is all you have to know about our classic liberal philosophy. It's on you. Don't wait for the government. Don't wait for the state. It's on you. So you have to try to, to explain in simple words. And even if you read my books, you will see it's, I guarantee, not one mathematic formula. I was very good at school in mathematics, but you have no theory. I'm an historian. I speak about history, about evidence. And this is the way how I try to do it. But of course, it would be much better to put more emotion. And so I want to start to produce more films because young people watch for films. So I can recommend one more time. You can find it YouTube, Life Behind the Berlin Wall, or Poland from Socialism to Prosperity. But I hope I can do much more.
My friend, thank you for being on Dad Saves America.
Thank you. Great. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Great questions.